All right, we got CROM Update number 62 with Raph Cornford. And Ralph, how are you doing this morning?
Well, I got a little bit of a cold, but aside from that, I am excited to be here with a historian of the pulps, artist, illustrator, inker, lover of Golden Age comics. That's an exciting way to start my Saturday, man, for sure.
Absolutely. Just for record, I want everybody to know how this all comes about. I have been slowly going through all the Weird Tales, Sword and Sorceries stories. So I collected them off of downloadable stuff. I put them in there, and then I built a playlist on YouTube to sort of just have people narrating in the back, and the narrations are always good. You know what I mean? They're just kind of you know there. It's just somebody telling the story, and that's great. Well, let me just say this is. I get to this one, which I was very excited for because it's a Clark Ashton Smith, which is one of my favorite pulp writers, and it's the Rendezvous of Everonge. And the guy doing the audiobook for this just blew me away. I'm thinking, wait a second, this is not somebody just making a random audiobook. This is a true fan. So I listened through this whole thing and I'm like, oh, I got to see what else is going on. And of course, Raph has how many audiobooks have you done so far
I don't
for the
know the
Pulse?
exact number. It's somewhere above 50, maybe it's like 70, I'm not sure.
And you have playlists for Clark Ashton Smith, and I got derailed, so that's why this bookmarker is here. Right? So I gotta get because I've been listening to all your audiobooks, and then I saw that you have, and you're on your second one, a collection of your own pulp, story illustrated, and comic book. And I said, you know what? Let me just see if he wants to do a little exchange. I'll send him, the CROM collected. And then, if it goes well, we'll get together on a fine Saturday morning and talk pulps. And here we are. And I can't thank you enough.
Well, it's great to be here. I want to offer a slight correction. I've produced three thrilling suspense fantasies, and
Oh,
I'm
man, I'm
currently
behind.
working on the fourth.
Link in the description below. So I'm going to have to do some catch up. So I'm going to start on your side and just let you kind of give your how do you fall into this whole pulp, sword and sorcery nonsense, as most people say, and get
Sure.
to thrilling suspense fantasy.
Yeah, so to give like a super succinct version of the story, I'm the son of an Englishman, and he was born in 1950 and grew up on Lord of the Rings. And by the time my dad was in his 20s in the 70s, the whole sword and sorcery revival thing was going
Right.
on, and so Conan had been rediscovered. L. Sprague de Camp was like putting together those novelizations of Robert E. Howard's stories, and people like Gardner Fox were putting out
Yep.
Kothar stories. It was the revival of sword and sorcery. Conan was getting published by Marvel Comics, and so my dad just had this kind of stuff around, and we always had books in the house. And so I just kind of stumbled into being excited by this stuff. And I think, like a lot of people, I discovered Robert E. Howard and Conan and H.P. Lovecraft long before I got to Clark Ashton Smith, who is actually my absolute favorite.
Yeah.
And it was while I was working on Thrilling Suspense Fantasy #1. I had done a few comics beforehand, kind of a fine art background, and I had reached out to a few people to see if they had wanted to write for me, since I was not confident at that time about writing stories myself. And I got a few ideas. Like, a friend of mine was like, let's do the story of King Arthur starting from the day he was born. And I was like, brother, this is too big of a story. Like, we'll be working on this for like 40 years, man. Like, too much. So then I thought, all right, I gotta brush up on this stuff myself. And I learned that there was kind of a third correspondent between the kind of like the big three of weird tales, right? We all know H.P. Lovecraft.
Yep.
We know Robert E. Howard. And the
Yep.
third correspondent is this enigmatic Californian poet and sculptor called Clark Ashton Smith. So I start like reading Clark Ashton Smith stories, and at first I'm like, God, this guy's a mouthful. Like, what, this is like these words are crazy. And then I went from saying these words are crazy to these words are crazy. Like, this guy he's so good at describing stuff. Man, this language is beautiful.
Yep.
And then, I don't know, you may have in your listening run across another YouTube channel. Has Roland Weefering crossed your radar?
No. I'll have to get that link from you.
Sure, I'm happy to send it. So I think Roland records some of his own, but he also uploads some I think they might be like AI recordings or something like that. But it was his readings of Clark Ashton Smith, because I play him in my studio while I'm drawing, while I'm doing, illustration work or whatever. Yeah. It was his readings of Clark Ashton Smith that like pushed me over the line into like wanting to start to pick up my own collection of Clark Ashton Smith books, and to want to start to record more, since so many of the stories were either AI recordings or they were I like Horror Babble, but he's an Englishman and he's got like a higher voice, does Ian Gordon. And like Roland Weefering he's got that kind of like gravelly American delivery that you can really lay into. And I was like, man, I want to hear Clark Ashton Smith like more in the Roland Weefering style. And my voice is in that register. So I thought, let's do it. Let's just start recording these things.
I think the thing I want to go back to is I had exactly the same reaction to Clark Ashton Smith. You when you dive into the old pulps and sword and sorcery and the Cthulhian mythos, that whole thing, they move you through stories very, very well, and you're completely on board. Clark Ashton Smith, and I believe I think creative people really react from a deeper place. And so at the surface level, we go, wow, these are a lot of colorful words descripting what. And then you start getting to the point where you're like, because I remember the day that I was like, you know what, I'm going to illustrate one of these little silly things by this guy, Clark Ashton Smith. And I think I got like maybe 45 minutes into roughing things out. And I said, I can't beat him. I can't beat these descriptive montages. Like I know this is going to sound incredibly cliche, but he paints with words, and I'm going to one day crack that nut, if you will. But right now, I am just completely transfixed on his. I hate even using the word style, but approach, his visualization of things. Now, I also want to give you a little bit of props in your prose. Is how many words is this? Is about 3,000? Would you say? Is that what?
I think it's more than 3,000 words.
Yeah, because it is half of the book. I found a lot of similarity, and obviously what you were pulling from out of the pulps, but specifically Clark Ashton Smith. And what I want to tumble in right now is the fairy tale. So when you really dig deep into how sword and sorcery gets into, its place, before even Robert E. Howard, and as it moves along, it's the masculine retelling of a fairy tale. There's some gold somewhere, there's some monster, there's some princess, and then there's the guy with the sword, the knight, and all that. You took an approach with your story that had like a duality, but the city and I don't want to give too much away. Like, I don't want to spoil too much away, but what was your approach going into writing, since you previously said you were not as confident as a writer?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was thinking about these classic elements, and I want to get to what I've learned since then, but let me start with where I was at with TSF1. My kind of direct inspiration for the kind of story that one is. Have you read Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser?
Yes. Yes.
So Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser are kind of that classic duo of the thief and the barbarian. And I thought, well, that's a great story.
Yeah.
How did the thief and the barbarian come together? And, in the world of Newan, we have like Lankmar, right? But I kind of felt like an underused setting is the kind of like cosmopolitan, very, very worldly, globe-spanning empire that we see in like the Spanish Caliphate. So I thought I'll take like a Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser type thing, and then I'll kind of put it in my own fantasy twisted version of the Spanish Caliphate. And the barbarian has got to come from somewhere else. He's got to come from some other land, and he's got to be freaky and big and athletic and, steel-thewed and cat-like and all of the descriptors that we want for a barbarian. But the thief should be from the city. A thief is an urban character.
Yeah.
So what would impel these people to come together? How would their stories join up? And to me, what that would be is, if you are a thief, you might recognize that getting beat, and this is all just in the hook for the story. So I'm not going to give anything away either. But
good.
The thief might say, all right, I can only climb so high within the kind of rungs of a thief's guild before really I become a target, before somebody like me would go ahead and rob me and kill me or get rid of me. So can I kind of like grab a big score of some kind and make it out of this brutal life that I have been raised in? That's the thief's motivation. That's what Shijiro wants to do. She's a thief. And without giving too much away, this city has like a big thing for gambling in Shulhaz. And in this society, the wealthy live in this kind of like sequestered, it's the old city, it's up on a plateau. And the lower city, as it's called, is this sprawling, constantly growing place where as industries develop, as peasants kind of gain a little bit of money, as things progress, this lower city spreads out below the plateau, but everyone comes together in this big fighting pit. And oftentimes the gladiators who fight are captured and enslaved from somewhere. And so Ornan, our barbarian, has been captured, and he has been rising in the ranks of the fighting pits. And there's all this gambling that goes on. And he is lined up for a championship fight against Suzib, who's the reigning champion. And so Shijira wants to steal all of the winnings from whoever wins this fight. She doesn't care who wins. She wants the gold. She wants even a better currency than gold. She wants like gemstones that are specially inlaid that carry more value than gold, because a backpack full of those and she's set for life. And what Ornan wants isn't quite clear. He's kind of a figure that we only see from the outside. But he's an incredibly fearsome fighter. He wears this mask. He's got these these kind of ball and chains that we can see there on the screen. And these weapons are very kind of foreign and mysterious. So he can wrap them around his arms and fight in more of like a boxing style, or he can whip them super far. And nobody has cracked the code. So the champion, who is long standing, some people think he's going to win. Some people think Ornan is going to win. The gambling is going crazy. And Shijiro wants a slice of it. So I thought this was a suitably dramatic way to kind of introduce the city and to create some compelling characters. And I didn't realize that this would be a series at the start. I just was like, all right, I'm going to write a story. And then when I wrote it, my friends who kind of helped me to edit said, hey, this is a series. These characters keep going. I won't tell you, you, the listener, because I want you to read it or listen to it yourself. But this story keeps going. And I said, oh, I guess you're right. I guess this story does keep going. And so I've continued to write it since then.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. You know, the writing pulp, there's a lot of license involved. And when you're really absorbed in the writing techniques, or the stylization, the verbiage and the stuff and such, it comes across that way. I think the thing that I was very much captured immediately by your story and then taken solidly through was the description of definitely the city, but most importantly, your fight scenes. Did you reference anything outside of pulps, like I don't know, gladiatorial manuals or something out there? Because your fight scenes were very very well descriptive. So,
oh, thank you. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I grew up doing taekwondo, played basketball. I've been doing boxing, like amateur boxing, for years and years.
There
so
you go.
Something that I really love about Howard's writing is, he did amateur boxing, and it always drew me to his boxing stories, even if they're a little bit silly or they're a little bit repetitive. Right. So I'm like a big boxing fan, a big MMA fan. I just love, I guess, combat sports. And so trying to take that love of combat sports into writing and describe it in a compelling way. I actually had to cut down those scenes. People gave me feedback and they're like, buddy, I'm not a huge MMA fan, they said to me. They said, this is too much description. And so I tried to boil it down to all right, cut down that word count. Let's just focus on the nuts and bolts of what's happening here.
That's also to keep the, obviously the pace, the story going as a pulp. So, that's very wise. You have a fine arts background. Where did you go for fine arts?
Yeah. So been drawing my whole life. I was like a late reader. I went to Montessori school from my early education, and they had to usually in Montessori school, you kind of let the child dictate what they're going to do. But they had a problem with me because I would just draw all day. And they're like, well, you've got to learn, you've got to read, you've got to do math. You can't just sit there and draw. And so I had to earn the ability to draw by reading one book at a time. And then after I'd read a book, then I could draw after a while. So drawing has been a lifelong interest, but I did my undergraduate in printmaking at UC Santa Cruz. And then I came to my current home, which is Bloomington, Indiana, because IU Bloomington offered me a kind of a teaching position to go along with graduate education in printmaking.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, the tradition of pulp illustration, the tradition of comics kind of comes out of the graphic world of printmaking, and that four-color process, that style, I just love it. And so learning the history of it and learning how to do all the traditional techniques has really informed what I want to do, which is not what my instructors wanted me to do. They there's this big difference between like illustration and fine art, and
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I have since kind of gone back to illustration and taken all of that printmaking knowledge, which I'm so grateful for, all of that strong thinking and technique and so on and so forth, and applied it right back to what drew me in the first place, which is the pulps.
So printmaking, wood block cut.
Woodcut and then lithography, which is
Yeah.
like drawing on limestone,
Yep.
which is how a lot of posters were done. And now lithography is still like the way that most mass production printing is done, but it's done via what's called offset lithography, which is like a
Yep.
metal plates and like big rollers, and the paper goes
Yep.
through the roller, and
Yep.
so litho is still a thing, but the word litho means stone, and it learning the traditional techniques are from this cat called Aloysius Senefelder, who in Bavaria was trying to figure out how to make images, and he figured out the chemical process of drawing on stone. So there's that, and then there is intaglio, which is and there's etching, dry point etching. So using
Right.
metal plates and rubbing ink into metal plates. So I do all that stuff. I know how to do all that stuff.
Wow. So you're still at Bloomington, Indiana University, teaching and doing your printmaking.
I only occasionally teach there, so I don't have like a
Okay.
regular position, but I come in and lecture about different topics, or I help to
Oh,
organize
cool.
exhibitions. Oftentimes now, I'm either teaching painters about conceptual art, which is interesting because I can kind of bridge the visual thinking of painters with the more technical or theoretical knowledge, or I'm doing exhibitions that relate to golden age comics to fantasy art, right? Because there's a museum and a gallery that are connected to the university, and so I'm kind of a local expert on those things, and I coordinate with my faculty mentors and friends who are in those fields as well. Interestingly enough, one of my great friends, Malcolm Smith, and he's the head of ceramics, but we're doing a big book right now. It's slow going because there's so many images, but we've been collecting every underwater golden age comic book cover, and we've scanned all of them. We're putting together the
Wow.
book itself now. So I've
Oh
just
wow.
gotten through all of the 1930s, and I'm into the 1940s laying out the actual physical book.
Oh man. Oh man. So everybody needs to understand that this is two for one. We've got a comic book story in the second half. Your style, especially the black and white work, just by hand and mark making, reflected a lot of like Frank Miller. Is he on your radar when it comes to referencing when illustrating comic books?
100%. a hundred
Woo!
percent.
Okay.
Yes, nailed it. Frank Miller
Oh,
is
good.
such a big influence for me. His Daredevil run is absolutely extraordinary. I know a lot of people look at his stuff from Dark Knight or look at his stuff from Ronin, but before
Yeah.
Dark Knight and Ronin was his run on Daredevil, which I just absolutely love. I've collected the entire thing. It's in fact I've got I don't know if you've ever like put up vinyl siding, but they've got these things called like J strips
Hmm.
where the siding connects to. But anyways, if you're interested in displaying comic books in your home, you can take those and you can screw them into the drywall, and then they're like a little
Oh yeah.
shelf. So
Oh
all of my
yeah.
Daredevils are up on my wall
Oh
in this room
nice.
to my left.
Nice. Yeah, I that is the that was the real entry point for me. Sixth grade, Dante Whitley. He came in with the first two Electra Assassin comics with Daredevil appearances, Electra Assassin appearances, and I had just gotten the week before a 3-pack of Charlton Comics, which had a Hercules in it, a horror movie, a horror comic. It was Haunted Love, and then a romance comic. So we were just sitting there, waiting. I think it was class was over and we were getting up, and he goes, "Oh man, that Hercules comic looks, that looks really really cool." So I show him my 3 comics. I was like, "Well, your comics look pretty cool too." So he's got mine, I got his, and he looks at me dead center and he goes, "You want to trade?" And I was from like 12 years old, a ninja mark. So it wasn't so much Daredevil, Marvel, or comics. It was because there were ninjas in it. And I was like, absolutely my friend. And from then on, it goes from there, following in and through comics, because you got the black and white indie explosion. So that's all going on. But his Ronin, I think, was also what sort of like nailed my fate, because I was also a big heavy metal magazine reader, and Mobius, and I also got a hold of Japanese comics. Don't tell me how, but I had the first volume of the Takebon volume of Lone Wolf and Cub. So when Ronin comes out, I know what the references are, and it just kind of goes from there. But my big question before we dive into the comic, and like I said, I'm not trying to spoil anything, but what helps you make the division in something being written and illustrated and something getting a full paneling out comic book story wise, Ralph?
Yeah, good question. They have different kinds of like paces of storytelling. So reading has one kind of pace and you imagine while you read. And then for me, comics have a different kind of pace. Comics are like, have you ever read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics? Is that on your radar?
Yes.
So I love Scott McCloud, the way that he casts the reader of comics as complicit in the story that's being told. We become an accomplice because we're filling in those gaps. So the way that I think about this is when I remember a comic book story, I don't necessarily always remember it the way it was on the page. I
Right.
remember it almost like it's an animation because our brains are joining up those panels and we get more visual information than while reading, but we put them together. And so a story that's a comic story to me is one that can become like a movie or like a animated movie in our heads
Yeah.
as we read it and as we put it together. So for me, a story that becomes a comic is one that I want to see rather than one that I want to describe. Like if I can draw a contrast between the story that is open there on the page, it's a story about people who are they were part of a war and they have been cut off from the main force of their army, and they've given up the project of the war. They know that the war has failed and all they want to do is they want to get back home, but they can't go back to the shore that they had entered because enemy forces have already defeated their army there. So they're looking for another way to get back to the sea and to get back to their homeland. And so to me, this is a visual story about people exploring a land and about the changing of the seasons, and what do we do with color and density of mark and mood. There's so much like mood in that story, which is visual, whereas the pulp in TSF1 is very much about I mean, the city is such a main character. What would it mean to have this harsh division between kind of the haves and have-nots in this city? What does it mean to go between this very opulent, stuff on the plateau and the way that everyday people live beneath the city? And so much of that relies on knowing about the city. It's less well suited to being a comic, even though the action sequences might be like great for something like a comic. The character of the city, I think, is better expressed in writing, because I can describe the way that people are in the city, or the way that interactions work or society works, in a way that's less well suited to the visual storytelling of a comic. Does that kind of answer that for you?
It does. It does. I love the animation part of it. I was I do a comic book with another guy on another YouTube channel called Turbo Pit Fighter. Name's Jake Jacobs. In the '90s, we got together and worked. He's in New York. I'm down in Wilmington, Delaware. Comic books belly out in '97. 98 starts rolling around, and there's this program called Flash Animation, and he gets into it first. And he says exactly the same thing. He's like, we already have basically half of the skills, which is all the paneling, all the framing. We just need to learn this, and then we could start doing, our own animation. And so we were at that for a couple of years. But, Alan Moore, is famous for saying that, movies, comics and movies don't really share the same language, and that the comic book in itself, when somebody falls in love with comic books, it's obviously what they're falling in love with is the art form of somebody taking you through a story by all of these little pictures, and then understanding the gutter, going back to Scott McCloud.
Yeah,
So yes, yeah. It is, and the stories are between the prose, your prose, and the comic book. As you even said, the way you describe the city and everything that's happening is that thing that's constantly surrounding you. Here, it's a mood, and almost don't want to give too much away, but a suspicion, like there's something obviously they're doing, to get home, but there's also something that's ahead of them that they're going to have to deal with.
Absolutely. Well said. And even though I reference animation, I guess I would agree that falling in love with comics is different than falling in love with, say, movies. It's because of the way, and I think this. I just want to make sure that I'm explaining it well. It's the way that we put together the story in our memory. It's the way that we compose or stitch together those pictures. So for the uninitiated, right, we're talking like technical terms. The gutter is that white space between each panel. And in that gutter, we as readers act. That's where our minds are working to put the story together. And it's a beautiful kind of involvement with a piece of media. And it's not intuitive, but then once you really start to process what that gutter does, once you appreciate how you are acting in that gutter, that's what's beautiful about comics.
It's a lot of heavy lifting. I think there are so many aspects yet explored to the mass media, the world at large, which is also very exciting as an artist to be navigating my own creativity through. The heavy lifting is on the side of the reader. So it's a 1-for-1. I've made a comic book story. It's now your job to read it, interpret it in your own way. I also think it has something. I've been playing around with this in my head because I'm such a sword and sorcery freak, and I'm always trying to get away from it because it's such a super niche. There's so many people that it's very magnetically attached to, but it's very hard to get other people, into, like, unlike superheroes, the Avengers and the
Yeah.
X-Men and that type of thing. But as an art form, I really think there's a lot of excitement there where people can actively be involved in the storytelling. And then I think the reaction over time when somebody's involved in reading, collecting comics, they start having their own stories. It's like a fertile field, if you will, for creativity. You're not going to get that with television. You're not going to get that with animation. Things that are moving and making noise, and you just sit there and you're eating popcorn. And I love doing that as well. But it does all the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, that's so true.
Right. And where it goes back to like pulps, it's not so much heavy lifting as I always refer to it as you have to let go of what you understand to be reality. You've got to just, okay, that's how that's been described to me, and I have to go through this now, and I'm okay with that. And we'll see where it goes. And then the marker at the end for a good or bad story, written one, is whether you had a bit of transformation, if you will, something like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting point of view. I really enjoyed that story, or the opposite. I don't like this kind of stuff. I need to go find something else. But is there anything you want to touch base on with comics? Because I would like to talk a little bit more about some of the things that are peripheral to what you and I are doing.
Well, let's see. With comics, I guess going back to our love of Golden Age comics, like the kind of density of the stories from Gardner Fox, or the density of stories in the Golden Age. It's not true of this comic. This comic is very spread out, but in TSF 2 and 3, there are really compressed stories where I'm trying to shove as much stuff as I can possibly shove into the story as I can. And that's reading and engaging more with Golden Age books and seeing just how much ground they covered in the shorter
10 pages. 10 pages.
Right. So even if I'm working in 20 pages or working in 24 pages, I'm trying to fit what might take 60 or 70 pages in a more contemporary pace. So thinking about compressing all of that down so that you have this, and this is about the Golden Age for me, this incredible bang for your buck, right? This is the most advanced form of entertainment for its day. Like now we have movies and we have video games, we have these other kinds of entertainment. But in the Golden Age, which I keep using that term and I haven't defined it. For our listeners, the Golden Age of comics really kicks off with Superman in Action Comics 1 in the mid-1930s, and it ends with the introduction of the kind of like Marvel Silver Age in 1962. So there's this chunk of time, but particularly before the kind of scare of the 1950s, where comics are widely read by Americans. They're not just for kids. Comics are telling a whole different kind of range of stories, and for 25 cents or for 10 cents, whether it's a pulp and comic mix-up in the 1950s, whether it's a 10-cent comic book, this is the most advanced, the most exciting storytelling medium that you can get your hands on. And they are competing avidly, like with each other. This book is competing with that book to be the most exciting thing. So with pulp covers or with weird tales, you're seeing these Margaret Brundage, somewhat erotic, somewhat like freaky covers, or with the comic books, how much storytelling, how many different stories can we get into one book? The technology as it existed in its time is something that I think about with comics, and I'm trying to contextualize that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's a lot for two guys like us. It's difficult to just pare it down into this is what it is because we're both completely absorbed with the process. And that process though is what we're leaning back to the beginning. Like we're literally going back to like, okay, these things were newspaper strips or anomalies in newspapers, and people then somebody starts collecting them and folding them and then repackaging and reselling them, and then they're like, well, we resold them all, we now need to start making new stories, new characters. And Gardner Fox really comes in at the pinnacle point, which is 1937, and he's doing it part time. When he's supposed to be an attorney, a lawyer, with his buddy Julius Schwartz, and or there was somebody else too. But anyhow, the fact that there was no Batman with Robin, there was no there were no like, for instance, Fox in 1950 with John Guinta, who was a big pulp editor and illustrator and writer himself. They put together CROM the Barbarian, which was they were trying to get it to be Conan the Barbarian, but Glenn Lord wouldn't let it up because he thought it was beneath the higher level that he would want to see Howard's work go. But there were all these chances they were taking, but they were still dealing with this new evolving way of telling stories.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult, I know, for me, and to just say, oh, well, a comic book is a bunch of boxes. You stick some words and some pictures. Sometimes you color them, sometimes you don't, and you go on your way. But my thing is, this is my art form. Like somebody would want to see a painting finished on a wall. I love reproduction. I love making something and seeing it reproduced. When I see it reproduced, it's almost finished as a work of art. Do you? Because I see so many parallels between the two of us, especially with the printmaking and the pulps and the such. Raph, are you leaning more and more as a creative person in the art form of what you're making? And then how does that calibrate to, sustaining thrilling suspense fantasy economically, business-wise?
When you say the art form, are you talking about like selling,
doing whatever the hell you want to do?
Doing whatever the hell I want to do.
Instead of trying to meet marketplace, like, hey, I have to make a 2024 version of a comic, to I need to tell this story and I want to visually tell it from a Frank Miller meets XYZ.
Great question. So I guess that's the question for a creator, is how do we sustain what we're doing? And for me, thrilling suspense fantasy is me kind of pulling out all the stops and doing exactly what it is that I want to do. At the same time, thrilling suspense fantasy is kind of an advertisement for my work as an illustrator. And this might tie into what we were discussing in terms of like related fields and related products. But in the world of like role-playing games, that world is super duper receptive to the history of the pulps that has kind of informed what role-playing games are, and the kind of more like raw and rugged and traditional art styles that are present in all of the inspiration material that has gone into role-playing games. So this wouldn't be stuff like, D&D 5th edition or 5th and a half edition, whatever we're on. This is the world of small publishers who want to capture the vibe that excited them. Oftentimes, I'm 36, so I'm on the young end of this stuff, but there are guys who are about 10 years older than me or 15 years older than me who got into the hobby in the mid 80s when they were kids, and when stuff like heavy metal was brand new, when you were getting Savage Sword of Conan coming out from Marvel in black and white. You were seeing that John Buscema art, or you were seeing Barry Windsor Smith when he came back to the book after he had gone through that kind of like crazy visual evolution, that skill jump between when he jumped off Conan and when he came back onto Conan. These are references that these creators know about and care about deeply visually. And so a lot of my professional work at this stage is for role-playing game companies. And then weirdly enough, I'm like not that big of a metal fan, but metal music, like metal album covers have really carried on this tradition for sure. But I've also done a fair number of like rock and hip hop album covers that also like kind of like want this aesthetic, right? The beginnings of hip hop are in that late 70s, early 80s period. And so those people, if they want to have an old school look or feel, I'm oftentimes working in that field to make stuff, or for guys who really love, like there's a rock band that kind of wanted to take a concept like the Gorillaz, but then do it in the style of the film The Warriors. And so I've been doing all of their album art. So people who love this era for whatever reason, is it role-playing games? Is it the music that their bands are making? My visual style becomes a part of their love for a time that they remember, that they want other people to love and to remember. So the professional work helps to sustain that, but also, as I think many people do, I have a day job. I work with kids, and I try to help them, live good and complete lives. I work with kids with disabilities. So all of these things kind of feed each other.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Nostalgia. I think that's the key to what's going on, and what we're really all experiencing. Because if I dare say it, it does now feel like everything has been done, and now we're dealing with derivative of derivative. Watered down version of Star Wars, which was a watered down version of Flash Gordon, which is, we get then, different things. I am that individual. I am 57. So right there in the middle of the 80s, I was being bombarded. Well, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I'm 11. I pick up Savage Sword of Conan on my birth. I think it was my 13th birthday. And that same night, I was given the Fiend Folio and the I forget the other book. Heavy metal was always available if there was nothing else, as it would go for comic books. And my CROM collected, and as I'm heading towards CROM Anthology, it's all about Savage Sword of Conan and heavy metal. And especially as I'm moving towards getting the first CROM Anthology out, I want that CROM Anthology to be filled with so much diversity in approach. Style is going to be one way of immediately looking at something, but it's the individual's approach to telling yet another sword and sorcery story, another pastiche of a Conan with blonde hair that looks like Tarzan, these types of things. But I think it really gets back into my nostalgia and it meeting with other individuals' nostalgia. So
Well, I like that. I think that nostalgia is one vector. Kurt, you were just talking about nostalgia and
yeah,
nostalgia as pastiche, but I think that undersells what you're doing, and I think that undersells what I'm doing, because nostalgia, it's the starting point, but it's not the ending point. And I'm not surprised at all. I mentioned French decadence, and you instead of going, Raph, what are you talking about? You
what?
said that's not a surprise to me, right? Which it doesn't surprise me that it doesn't surprise you in terms of our commonalities, because French decadence is this earlier route to what Clark Ashton Smith was doing. And at the core of French decadence is this notion called spleen, and spleen is an ennui, a dissatisfaction with the alienation that we feel in the present moment. But the present moment in Paris in 1881 is not the present moment in March, or excuse me, in April of 2025. Those present moments are going to be different. And when we have that sense of spleen, and when we reach out for something beautiful, and maybe even something that we can't quite reach, but we want to make, we're responding to different conditions. And so not only does French decadence come at the root of sword and sorcery, like the tale of Satampra Zeros, this story of two thieves that Clark Ashton Smith writes in the Hyborian Age, that becomes a direct inspiration for Robert E. Howard as he is conceiving of the more well-known sword and sorcery stories, right? But Clark Ashton Smith is a huge fan of French decadence, and he teaches himself French in order
Yeah.
to translate Baudelaire. And Baudelaire has a poem called Spleen, which is in a book called The Flowers of Evil, which is all about that sense of dislocation, or that sense of alienation from the modern moment, from the surroundings of the moment. And so nostalgia isn't just reaching for the past. Nostalgia is the starting point of a journey into making something that responds to the conditions of now. If you understand it's kind of like a theory that I've been developing about why is this stuff compelling, and why is it compelling across the 20 years that separate our ages, or
Yeah.
across the over 100 years that separate us from Clark Ashton Smith, from Robert E. Howard, from H.P. Lovecraft. What unifies this? It's not just nostalgia. I think it's spleen.
Man, oh boy. So I just want to give you a little more insight about myself to carry this carry this going. My goal as an artist, a creative human being, is to bring what I have as a creative person to the page from a sword and sorcery perspective, nostalgically, in the appearance artistically of something like Cy Twombly. So I don't know if you're familiar with Cy Twombly's work.
Yeah, I am. I am.
So there's I live just south of Philadelphia, and there is a room called 50 Days of Ilum. And this is a suite of paintings that Twombly did, and the museum acquired. And this is 20 something, whatever years ago it was, that I had gone with friends to hit the museum in Philadelphia on a Sunday, and they had to drag me out of that room. His work has always haunted me in the most positive way, creatively. The first time I came across his work was the first time I went to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and was super excited to engage modern art, which at the art history level was Picasso and Matisse and Renoir and blah blah blah. Right? Pay my money. Went the way it was the check-in booth. It was a wall that then you would walk around either side, and on the other side of it was one of Cy Twombly's untitled, and it was basically the chalkboard painting, which was just him making these loop-de-dee squirgles and stuff. And I just lost my mind. I said, this is not art. This is not art. My brain just kept screaming because it couldn't comprehend it. Correct me if I'm going too far off from where you're at with spleen, but I feel I have a similar approach to wanting to explain it and also present it in my art, that I might not be the best, knockoff of Sword and Sorcery, Savage Sword of Conan, John Buscema, and Alfredo. You know what I mean? Like, I might not be, but I'm really hoping that what I am producing, like I said, as this, being 140 pages of black and white Sword and Sorcery goodness, is that somebody would stumble across this and be almost upset. But that upset is actually a positive. It leads them more into investigation than just a, oh, wow, that was cool. Oh, wow, that was cool. Am I with you on the same kind of approach in trying to make something that's more engaging than a product?
I think so, and I think it's the personal drive aspect of it, right? Like your marks are worked in a way, right? Like I was getting told in grad school, like, hey, you're working too hard on each image. It should, you got, in my case, still like, oh, you've got such drafting ability. Why are you straining so hard over each part of this? And this is your second printing of CROM. You have gone back into all of the art that you already did. Is that correct?
Yeah. Because the first time I go into it, it's just ballpoint pen, and there's nothing wrong with these images. When I made these images, I was doing figure drawing every Tuesday night. I was employed at a real job. I knew I was going to be leaving that real job to return to being an artist. Was frustrated with stopping and sharpening a pencil, so I just started incorporating ballpoint pen to not have to, stop and sharpen a pencil. Could just keep moving and moving. And it came across where I wanted two things to happen. I wanted the linear sense of writing words and the linear sense of describing objects to be in the same compartment on a page. That's also why there's no defined gutters. So it's exactly like this. There are gutters between these paragraphs, but the flow is to read the entire page. So what my theory is I'm going to do 4 stories of just CROM. That's just what I like drawing. But technically speaking, I want to see if I can accomplish this theory. Proving it or not is one thing, but getting it out there. I think it works. I think you'll also notice I do where is it? Let's see. Yeah, it goes here. Here, this is a good, right? Yeah, here we go. So I use just a Times Roman, where here I use a more what I call pulpy typewriter font.
Yeah.
So that was another addition I had put to the rendering, which was the value system, which was something that I was exploring when I got with Jake to start working on these turbo pages. His pencils were already done, and I did not want to trace his pencils like as an inker should, right? I wanted to add a whole nother depth and layer to the work. And I believe I do, but we only work on this every Sunday. So I wanted to keep pushing it. And that's where I was like, well, I already have these pages laid out. Let's take it to another layer.
And to me, it's that personal impulse to keep working, to continue going, to not be satisfied at that. To me, a commercial product is you do not the bare minimum, but you do what is required of the job, and then you move on to the next job. And where it becomes personal is when you're pouring more of yourself into it than the requirements of the job set forth. And and that's, I think it's that impulse towards individual creativity or individual mark, or even what's upsetting about Cy Twombly's abstractions, or upsetting about the degree of finish or uncertainty in what Cy Twombly does. That I think that's a response to the conditions of modernity that we experience, right? So I'm getting a little bit philosophical with it, but I think
please go do it.
That's spleen as a human response to modernity. And I think nostalgia is a part of it, but I think nostalgia is the beginning of the journey, and the journey continues through spleen into I'm going to work really, really hard on this. I'm going to pour back over this. I'm going to work in maybe a way that doesn't make sense to do. It might be harmful to my career prospects to work in this way. I'm working on this even though I'm not working on something else that might pay better, because I have to. Because I have to explore it, because I have to push it further. And that's kind of what I see in your mark. And that's what the decadent response to conditions of modernity is.
Oh boy. So the my CROM project, if you will, CROM the Barbarian, the CROM Anthology, is because CROM is a public domain character, there should be no concern for anybody to feel threatened that, I own cromthebarbarian.com, or I've made this thick tome. I'm promoting myself probably more than anybody else. The responsiveness that I'm going for, and I have to admit, am getting, albeit the entry point are people who would like to get into comics, and that's fine. They find that, oh, hey, there's this, I can do a 10-page or a 3-page or 8-page, or I can write this, and that's what we have going on. But what's happening today, in all gratitude for you to take the chance to, respond to my email that, thank God, didn't go to the spam folder, exchange books, come on to the CROM update for the first time, because I will be pestering you to come back for a second time, because I do have to get the copies of the 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as it goes along. But it's also to share. So, not to corner you. I don't know if I mentioned it in my email, but I will rebring it together. For the CROM Anthology, I'm offering, there's many segments. There's about 3 segments that I'm adding. I'm having what's inside the book. One of the segments is a 7-page teaser of somebody else's work. And so what happens is, on the 8th page, there's then a visual description, a picture of the actual book, who's working on it, and then a QR code that leads them to purchase and get involved, on that side. Now, I am remembering we did have a short conversation right before scheduling this, where collaboration is open to you, Ralph?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. I would like to start by giving you. Seven is just the seven with the eighth page is just sort of the initial package. It's not standardized. It's something we would discuss off camera, and and put it into the appropriate context that keeps you, the creator and owner of content, comfortable and everything. But I just have to say, I am so excited to have met you this first time. I'm also, like I've said on other podcasts with Jake and even on this one, I'm not a one and done. So I like the idea of constantly coming back to individuals and working on. But I have a feeling, correct me if I'm misinterpreting the feeling, Raph, but we might actually end up for CROM Anthology #2 and one of the future issues of Thrilling Suspense Fantasy, a Raph Kurt collaboration.
Yeah, no, that'd be really fun.
Awesome. Good. With that being said, I want to close this out. What I always do at this point is give my guest time to share the links, places to find you, any events coming, crowdfunding, so on and so forth. And I will grab those links and put them in the description below. So go ahead.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I think I recently shuttered my web store because it wasn't getting the same business that people contacting me directly via either like Instagram or YouTube was. Wow. So I'm at Raph Makes Art, I think, on Instagram. And then I have opened up a web shop on my YouTube, which is the new place where you can go to order issues. So I'll make sure that the web shop links are available to you. I don't know off the top of my head, I can't recite the URL to you, but it's the shop that's connected to my YouTube channel, which is Thrilling Suspense Fantasy, and there I read stories and I take time to discuss them just a little bit. Sometimes I read my stories, I read some newer stuff, but primarily I'm reading stuff from that classic age of the pulps.
Yeah. And they are super enjoyable. And, the other layer you add, Ralph, to your audiobooks is a conversation, an open-ended conversation. And I did very much react to that. So, not to beat conversationally a poor horse anymore, but, you're working very much like myself outside of the driving a product to market. You are creating something and actively creating something that's engaging and very open to comments and conversation, collaboration. And I'm super excited to, like I said, have met you today, and can't thank you enough for taking the time, and look forward to the next time that we get together.
Well, back at you, Kurt. I love the idea that somebody is doing something like me, like they're just in a studio and they want to hear something cool, and I come up as a part of your quest to hear this stuff and to engage with this material. Like the notion that you're drawing while you listen to stuff that I made to listen to while drawing. Great, perfect. That's what I want. Yes. And I hope that somebody else is drawing while they listen to this. And you don't have to be drawing. You can do anything while you listen to this. But it warms my heart, especially if you are a listener, if you are out there drawing. Hell yeah. So, Kurt, wonderful to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. And I look forward to the next time. So we'll see you very soon again.
Sounds great. All right. You have a lovely weekend, man. It was great talking to you.
Hold tight. We're going to do a little after show.
Okay.